How do you have open and honest communication? That's what we talk about today with our guest, Grace Gavin. This is something that people question about whether it's a work relationship or a personal relationship. So take a listen, let us know what you think. Welcome to the art and science of difficult conversations where we truly believe when we communicate better, we live better. So I'm Chris, your host, as you know. Lucie, how are you doing today?
I'm pretty good, even though if you see me sneezing in the background, it's some allergies again. We have some
Hmm.
fires in California. How are you doing?
Better than that, I guess. We don't deal with those kind of fires
No
out here in
fires,
Boston.
just the heat.
Just the heat. Although I think a year or two ago they had like those ridiculous brush fires or forest fires in Canada, and we
Oh
got affected
yeah,
by that
the
smoke.
pollution. Yeah.
Yeah, so well, hopefully you're okay. Hopefully you're not going to be affected too much. Um, but
It's
climate change.
yeah. Lots of smoke here, but it's not too bad. Not that
Yeah.
horrible. Yeah. Luckily
Do you
I'm
have
safe.
asthma?
When it gets really bad, yes, but um
Yeah.
it's more allergies. I have to take allergy pill every day. So it's
Okay.
manageable, manageable.
Well, I'm excited today because we're talking to somebody that I've been connected with on LinkedIn for quite a while, and anytime meet somebody on LinkedIn, I follow their stuff and I read their stuff, and I'm always impressed by the knowledge people have on here. So for me, it's always like meeting a celebrity whenever I get to interview somebody that I've seen from afar. So I wanted to really, we're really excited to have Grace Gavin on our podcast today. Grace, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks so much, Chris. I think you're a little generous in calling me a celebrity in that way, but I also see your things and have just been following along for a while. So this kind of feels like the meeting of two worlds, right? Because I'm in the
Mhm.
communication space. Obviously,
Yeah.
you all are with this podcast. So I'm excited for what we're going to get into.
Yay.
Yes. So tell the audience, who are you? What brought you to this point? Tell us all about your life story.
Well, I'll try to make it brief because I could drag it out. But my name is Grace Gavin. I'm co-founder of No Honesty. And for the audience listening, just to be clear, that's KNOW, not NO. A little bit of play on words there, but also just digging into it a little bit, acknowledging the lack of honesty we have in our world today. And I grew up in Michigan. I'm the last of 8 kids, grew up on a dairy farm, so learning hard work very early with my family and my parents. And fast forward to where I am now, I'm working, very blessed to be working with my business partner, Ken Bogard, for the last over 6 years now together and really helping teams communicate better, focused on helping them be open and honest. And I've learned so much throughout that journey and gotten a lot of things wrong and learned where to get things right.
What drew you to caring about communication and within teams?
I just had been in so many cultures and workplace cultures in my personal life that people would kind of skirt the truth or just not be clear in their words, or pretend that things were better than they were without acknowledging what was actually going on. And it would drive me crazy. So
Hmm.
we're all seeing the same thing, right? That would happen all the time, but we wouldn't talk about it and we wouldn't acknowledge it. And I kept seeing how that was hurting us and hurting us and hurting us. And um, in 2020, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And we kind of just ignored that reality of what stage 4 meant. And he had a 3% chance of survival. But we dug in anyways. He was a fighter through and through. And so he went through chemo. He was on all the drugs and the pills. And just watching how that affected my family and our inability to really be honest and to say, here's what we're dealing with, a 3% chance. So it's not to say that a miracle couldn't happen, but the likelihood was really small and we never acknowledged it. And he had a battle of 5 months and then he was gone. And I think about all the time, the conversations I could have had with him before he left and learned so much more from him, especially as I'm on my entrepreneurial journey now. and what he went through and what I could have learned. And I think we missed out on so much because of that. And so that informs a lot of why I do what I do and why this lights a fire under me, because these conversations, these difficult conversations at times, can literally be a matter of life and death. And I think we
Mm.
need to strengthen our ability to have them. And for me, that was a real miss on my part. And I don't want anybody to go through that again, whether it's we're talking about a cancer diagnosis and something as serious as that, or we're talking about a really big business objective. And are we going to hit it or are we going to not? And how that affects people's lives and our ability to be honest about it, to have those real, open, and honest conversations.
Mm. When you were growing up, what was that kind of the norm for your family to not talk about things or kind of skirt the serious issues?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think being the last of 8 kids is part of that too, because my parents had already been through raising kids. And so, um,
Mm.
I was there and I was watching it all happen. And we're not, uh, we'll tell you, we're not necessarily a touchy-feely family. Uh, but what that kind of extends into is that we didn't necessarily talk about the hard things. And I think we're getting better at that, most certainly. But I didn't feel like that was the case when I was growing up. And not even just in family circumstances, but when I went to school with friends, like there are certain things you didn't talk about. And then you felt, at least I felt like, am I the only one this is happening to? Is this just me? And feeling so alone. And I think that a lot of people are experiencing that now, today, even. Like I was experiencing it as a kid, and I think other people did too, but we're seeing it happen so much more prevalently now that even the US Surgeon General has declared loneliness a public health epidemic. It's
Mm.
killing people.
So sounds like honesty is in a way a tool, honest communication, a tool to break the barrier that keep us from connecting with each other.
Yeah, that's
Sounds
exact.
like.
Yes. And we'll talk about the book a little bit, but the tagline of our book is eliminate the divide, become a masterful communicator, and connect with anyone. Because largely how we connect as human beings is through communication. And so if we're not skillful in that, if we don't understand what it means to be open, what it means to be honest, and how to use that to connect with other people, yeah, we're not going to have that connection. And that is it's a core human need if you think about it. And you can use that in different terms of you can call it connection, you can call it belonging, all of those, but it's a huge necessity as human beings for us to have a full and meaningful life.
What would you say prevents people from, since it's such an important need, from being honest, from having those conversations to connect with others and feel that belonging?
Yeah, I think what I really think it is a lack of openness. And so I want to be clear with the audience on what I mean by that because we're looking at it in the ways that maybe we haven't thought about before when we hear the phrase open and honest. So honesty is being truly and freely yourself, speaking into what you want and how you feel. So if you think about words like vulnerability, authenticity, being yourself, that all falls into there. And that's really great. And that's what we want. We want people to connect as themselves, to not have to project a facade to feel like they fit in to a situation. But the reason I think that we do that, and we explore this in the book, is because there is a lack of openness right now in our culture and in our world. And openness is listening without reservation, putting your needs and wants on pause for someone else. And how often do we do that in a conversation with somebody else? How often do we pause and say, let me not try to get what I want out of this? Let me be fully present with you, hearing what you're saying. Process it for a moment and then have your response. And I think it's really hard to do these days with technology, with life moving faster than it is, to just pause and be fully present. Put your needs and wants on pause for a moment to be with somebody else. And so that's what I think is the problem, is that big drive, that lack of openness. And also the perceived lack of it too. Because
Mm.
you might be fully present with me, but if that's not how I'm experiencing the rest of the world, that's not what I'm going to expect in this conversation either. We all have watches on our wrist. Some of them have notifications that pop up. We have cell phones on the table where there's always one distraction away from no longer being fully present with somebody else and not really seeing them and creating that real communication. And we're all aware of that these days.
Hmm. When you were working through your book, then when you were researching it, and you've dived a lot more into communication over time, did you ever think about it and reflect back onto kind of your relationship with your dad and your family and think like, did it bring up like different things for you as you were kind of working through this stuff and studying it?
Yeah, it's actually one of the stories in the book, but one of our 6 practices that we share, because we want to make all of this simple, tangible, and implementable for people. And one of the 6 practices is called the agreement. And so, quite simply, it's a simple script we teach to people. And it goes like this. Will you agree with me on how we're going to communicate? I want you to be 100% honest. Again, meaning be truly and freely yourself, speaking into what you want and how you feel. I promise I'll be 100% open to it. I will listen without reservation. I'll put my needs and wants on pause for you. And in return, I will be honest with you and I ask that you be completely open to it. So that's the simple script, right? We're working on it. We're using it with clients. We use it with all of our vendors, in our team. It's amazing. But as I was writing the book and working on this, I was kept seeing it come back and back to my family and saying, oh, this is so great for teams, for organizations. I need it in my family too. And so I went and I used the agreement with my mom, actually. And you want to talk about difficult conversations. I love my mom to death. I think she's a wonderful person, but this was not how we had been operating since I became an adult. That was not a relationship. And so this is going to be kind of a hard right turn for us. And thankfully she said yes. And that's the way she wanted to communicate as well. Had that craving for it. But I would have never known that if I hadn't stepped into that conversation. And we're still working on it. I don't get it always perfect. She doesn't get it perfect, but that's also part of what it means to be human is that we're continually building these skills, building this relationship together. It's not just me all the time.
Hmm. So you're building in that well, the word and that we use is psychological safety so that you
Mhm.
can make mistakes and you can grow and learn together.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, I'm human, you're human. We're going to get things wrong, and that's part of the human condition. And if we can make that space for other people in how we would want it for ourselves, we're going to create better relationships. We're going to collaborate better. I personally think life's going to be better.
That's the tagline of our show: communicate better, live better.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Meeting of two worlds right here, Chris.
You've mentioned several steps. I, of course, have questions about the agreement. Let's say if somebody doesn't agree or they want to agree, but there's still something holding them back. Let's say a fear from looking back or a fear that they don't trust the other person, that they are safe with them. What would you suggest in those situations when people do want to have honest conversation with the other person, but they have some concerns when they are going to be honest? Let's say the information is going to be used against them, for example.
Hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
I think about it in terms of it's a living, breathing agreement.
Mm.
So between the 3 of us, we have it here now, by the way, because we just did it together. And it's about building it up over time. But if we don't state that clearly that that's what we want, the likelihood that we're going to get it, that's the kind of communication we're going to have, is next to zero if we don't state what it is that we really want out of the conversation, out of the relationship. So, number one, that's really important to use it. But then it's living and breathing because you point back to it. So, Lucie, you bring an idea to me, and maybe I have 10 things already on my plate. Like, nope, don't want to hear it. And you can say, hey, remember when we made that agreement? I don't think you're being open right now.
Mhm.
Can you just give me a minute and hear what I'm really saying? And you bring it back to that. Or you come back and say, I had somebody ask me one time, how are you doing? And I said, good. Just kind of as what we all do, is what our immediate response is. And then I said, hang on, we have the agreement in place. Let me come back to that. I've actually had a really crazy day. I feel like I'm running all around, but I'm really excited to be here with you in this moment. And yeah, sure, it takes a couple of seconds extra, but now that person really knows where I'm at. And if somebody doesn't want to buy into the agreement and have that kind of communication with you, I also think that's great because now you know where the relationship stands and you can continue to build on it. Maybe you walk away from that relationship, but you have more information there. And I think that's the important part and helping each other to continue to build those skills over time. When you have the agreement in place, you're already starting from a head start and then you're building it together. Versus if you don't use it at all, well, I don't really know where you're starting from then.
Mm.
So it sounds really important what we with Chris talk a lot about preparing and having that intention what we want to get out of that conversation, out of that even relationship sounds like, and being very intentional about it and communicate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned there are some other steps. What would be some other steps after that agreement
Mm-hmm.
is set?
Well, we built some other language around it because I think language is really important. I'm going to forget who it's quoted to. So if either of you know, please tell me. But the quote is limits of my language mean the limits of my world. And so we want to build
Mm.
some language around that for people. And so the question is, well, if you're not being honest, what's happening? If you're not being open, what's happening? And putting some language to that, some imagery to that for people and understanding. So when you are not being honest, you are being fake you. And that's the facade you project rather than being 100% honest. We all know what it feels like to be fake. And whatever that feels like to you, could feel like a mask coming over your face, feels icky, whatever it is. We know when we're in a conversation and we're being fake. Or we look back at it and we know that's what was happening. So building some awareness around that and working on that not happening in the moment. So that's on the honest side of things. Then we've got the wall. And the wall is the divide we put between ourselves and others rather than being 100% open. So imagine quite literally, I put up a brick wall between us, stops our conversation. So that's what we're talking about. When is that happening to you? And is it a person that it happens with? Is it a pattern? Is it a place? Whatever it is for people, starting to build that awareness too. I have the wall go up all the time. The example that I gave about ideas with you, Lucie, that happens between me and my business partner all the time. He's got so many fantastic ideas, but there are a lot of times where I do have everything going on my plate and I'm like, I can't take another thing right now, or I can't hear you out. And if I shut him down, we're losing a really great idea, or we're losing the ability to collaborate together. So he will have to say to me sometimes, I just need you to be open for a minute. And that's a good reminder for me that, oh, yes, okay, let me pause, let me be there with you. So those are two really important pieces. And then taking you all the way around, I'll just give you all the 6 practices and then whichever one pings you the most, we'll talk about. But the other one we have is called the assessment. And that's where we're putting some numbers to this because communication, conversations can be kind of nebulous, but we need to help build some language around it, help people get some arms around it, some data. So what the assessment is, it's free to take on our website if people want to, and I highly encourage you to do so. But it's giving you the real-time data on your ability to be honest and your ability to be open and putting them side by side so you know what is your ability to receive and deliver real communication. And we take it a step further, break it down into your work life, into your personal life, because sometimes it's different for people. Sometimes people are better at work or better in their personal life, but you can translate those skills. So that's really important. And then the last 2 we have are the still, which is helping you uncover and become aware of where you're at today. So building in some self-awareness, understanding, we look at it in terms of categories of life, but where are you content and where are you discontent? Because I will tell you that both of those, wherever you land, is showing up in your leadership. Even if you're content in all the things in your work life, but you are discontent in your personal life, that is translating to your leadership, that is translating to how you're having conversations. We got to become aware of that. And then once you know where you're at, that leads us to the last of the 6 practices, which I kind of touched on before, but it's called your pursuit. And it's answering the question of what do you really want? Because until you know what it is that you really want out of the relationship, out of your work, out of whatever it might be, everything gets a little bit harder if you're not pointing towards what it is that you really want. And I talk to leaders all the time who can't identify that right away. And that's okay. It's okay, but it's not okay to never know. Because if you're
Mm.
leading people, if you're leading teams, if you're leading an organization, even if you're just leading yourself, You need to know what it is that you really want, and you can begin working towards that. And then list the people around you to help get towards that and help them get what they really want. Because I think we make a better world when people are getting what it is they really want. And what they really want could be better relationships, could be better work culture, whatever it is. It's going to be better for everybody, is what I believe. So that's all of the 6 practices. I know that's a lot, but take it where you want.
Two thoughts. I that last one about just understanding the goal. I remember I worked with one manager around how to have all types of difficult conversations, and the only thing she took away was write down the goal of the conversation on the top of a piece of paper when she went in to talk to her team or her employees. And just that one act had like a huge impact on all of her communication. She said she was much more focused. She was able to manage, like if they were trying to go in different places, she was able to stay focused. And it helped her feel more comfortable knowing that I know where I need to go in this conversation and
Yeah,
with this relationship.
that's awesome. And we talk about it. We train leadership teams, but then we train their next level of people. So that could be their managers, their entire organization, whatever it looks like for them. But how much it helps the leader to know what it is that their direct report really wants. And maybe it's a promotion and you help them get there, or they really want some work-life balance because they just brought a new family member in to their
Mm-hmm.
household. Whatever it is, you help them get what they really want. You are going to have a dedicated person at your company for a much longer time
Yeah.
than if you're just trying to hit measurables and hit metrics, which are important. But if you're helping people get what they really want, man, you got people bought in and you've got that productivity number skyrocketing when you do that.
Yeah. That's where you and I are aligned because we write about that stuff. Uh,
Exactly.
and I want to go back to something you said earlier on, which I loved, is the idea that if you are trying to do this agreement and you're trying to bring up stuff, and with Lucie, and Lucie says no, I don't agree to that. At least you know where you stand. And I think that's a really powerful thing, like getting comfortable with that no or that pushback. And I teach that a lot with conflict resolution or negotiation. Is once you hear a no, that's honesty. That's like them being truthful. You're not gonna get a false yes. They're not gonna falsely say no. That's a boundary. And now you can understand better the playground that you're in, the sandbox that you're in, and then you can understand why that's a boundary and what you need to do. How
Yeah,
do
that's
you
exactly it.
how do you otherwise access that kind of honesty? If like because I think everybody's always concerned. A lot of managers are concerned with how do I know my employees telling the truth, or how do I hold them accountable? But how are you accessing that honesty and creating that culture or the environment where they can access that?
Yeah, I think well, number one is obviously the agreement and talking about and educating your people on what it means to be open and honest. And it's interesting because, Lucie, that's not the first time I've gotten that question about what if somebody says no. But interestingly enough, I've never had anybody say no to me. And I use the agreement at least once a day in any conversation that I'm having. And maybe part of it is because people know I'm an open and honest expert and this is my whole life. This is what I get fired up to talk about. But I've never had anybody say no. I've had people get curious or want to understand a little bit more. And what that says to me is that this is what people want. This is what we want in our relationships. This is what we want in our workplaces. And for some people, it might feel scary, but it's being able to walk through it together to have that difficult conversation because the conflict that people have and that we help people through for all of us, that conflict is either going to be resolved by having the conversation or you're going to hold on to it internally and you're going to have a conflict with somebody and they're never going to know. Like Chris said this thing and I thought he was wrong, but I'm never going to have that conversation with him. Well, now I've got a conflict with that Chris that he doesn't even know about. We can't resolve that. We can't make any kind of progress forward. Or worse yet, I take that to, let's say, Lucie, and now we're going to create a drama triangle around it and talk to Lucie about, can you believe what Chris said? This is crazy. Well, now I
Mm.
put you in a really difficult position, Lucie, because do you break trust with me and go talk to Chris about it? Or do you break trust with Chris and keep it between us? And that's not a fair thing either. And so helping people walk through that conflict. And I think the agreement puts some boundaries, some guardrails around that, like you were talking, Chris, that we can step into this conversation and we're not going to get it perfect. We are never going to be 100% honest, 100% open, 100% of the time. That's really key. We're working towards it. We're building these skills, but we're going to get it wrong sometimes. And I think that's okay. And I think it's even more okay when you own it, especially as a leader, or if you're watching a leader own it, say, I'm not getting it perfect all the time. That creates a lot more space for you to be able to have those conversations and to go back to them if you need to. But hopefully you don't have to because you're having that conversation and that honesty on the table immediately rather than trying to skirt the truth, self protect, whatever it might be.
What comes to mind is some scenarios with some clients that they are bringing, they work with different cultures. And some cultures are keeping the mask on, saving the face, communicating in a way that is more indirect rather than direct communication and feedback. So just hinting to really make sure the most important thing, we keep the face, we save the face. What would you say in those circumstances when, let's say, people do say, yes, I agree, but they actually feel no? And say, yes, I have to say yes to stay safe. But in reality, I'm not going to admit I don't understand. I'm just going to ask colleague and help me figure it out. Because with my manager, I'm afraid if I say I don't get it, I'm going to look stupid.
Yeah.
What would be the advice for the manager how to navigate with these cultural differences, maybe? And perhaps for somebody that is in that situation that they know, the manager keeps telling me I should be honest, but I really cannot be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think the manager's got to know that. So, first, are we helping them know that? Thinking about the employee, are you, the idea of managing up there, but then bringing it back again and again and again and saying, I want you to be open and honest with me. And if your people that you're managing feel like they can't be honest with you, you're going to get a sense of that. And most of the time, it is because you have a lack of openness and
Hmm.
they're picking up on that. And so if I don't think you're going to be open, if I don't think you're really going to hear me, if you're going to pause what it is that you're doing, if you're a manager who's constantly running from meeting to meeting to meeting, or you're on your phone or talking when people are trying to have a conversation with you and you're not focused on them, look at that and examine that because there's a lack of openness there. And people want to be honest. They really do. I believe that. Nobody wants to lie. Nobody wants to skirt the truth. Nobody wants to self protect. But that's happening because you, as a manager, have not practiced being open with them. You have not practiced listening without reservation to them. And without reservation, that's a really important point that I want to make there. Without reservation is without judgment, without preconceived notions, whatever reservations you might have about that person, put those aside for a moment and really listen to what that person is saying. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them, doesn't mean you have to implement their idea, but help them be heard. I heard an insane stat the other day that we only feel heard 5% of our days. 5%.
Hmm.
And so is it any wonder that your direct reports aren't going to be honest with you if you're not willing to be open to them? You got to consider that for yourself. And then if you have and you've done the work and you are open and you believe that and you're working on it and they're still not honest with you, well then it's time to look at, is this the right person for the organization? But having that in place and keep pushing for it and keep asking for it because this is really what people want in their lives. It's just, are you living it? Are you breathing it? Are you doing it?
Hmm. And I imagine building that type of culture takes time anyway. Even if you are new and you as a manager, even if you're new and you're always going to have that matching your actions to your words. I can only imagine that'll take time to build that trust and honesty. So that reiterating and constantly bringing it up and then also not punishing somebody if they are honest with you
Yeah, I
or not
do.
retaliating.
Yeah, I do think it takes time, but it's what we're doing is trying to shorten that gap and accelerate that.
Mm.
by the education, by talking about it. Because if you want your people to be honest with you, right? It's like, yeah, I don't want my people to lie to me. And I think that's pretty obvious. But if you don't state that to them, that's not clear. And that's not fair to them. So
Mm,
making it clear as it possibly can be. And in working with clients, when we're equipping them with this education, with these 6 practices, we're doing that within 3 months.
mm.
And then we're going deeper on it and we're building the skills around it, right? But we're doing it pretty quickly there because we want to start working on it. We want to get that education. We want to make sure everybody understands what it means to be open and honest. And these are the expectations we have as an organization. And here's how it's going to move forward. And yes, it's going to take a little bit of time to rewire the neuroplasticity in people's brains, but it happens so much faster if you're saying it over and over again. You're using the agreement every single day.
Mm.
You're starting meetings out saying, I want everybody to be open and honest. Maybe it's in your core values, whatever it is. This is how we talk to, it's in your processes. This is how we talk to clients. This is how we operate internally and building it that way too. So it does take time, but I think it can be accelerated.
I'd love to get your thoughts on, the times there are times that managers can't be open and honest, right? If they're talking about employment statuses or disciplinary actions, or let's say just secret information that hasn't come out yet and they're not allowed to talk about it. How do you verbalize that to your team that you want to be open and honest and there's limits to that? What do you usually do around that?
Yeah. I think acknowledging that is really important. And when we're talking about building that trust too, I'm not saying go do a 180 because that'll shock your people and that'll shake the stability. So if you've been a closed book company, if you've never shared any kind of financials, I don't think it's a great idea to just send an email of the P&L to people the next day because they're not going to understand it. They're not going to have the education around it. You got to do it in steps and get there, but it is possible. And then, there's unfortunately those two exceptions right now in our world, which is your HR policies and your legal policies, right? If you sign an NDA, well, don't break the NDA. That would not be a great idea for you. But
Mm.
what we know about human beings is that they can handle bad, good, ugly, whatever it is type of news, but we can't handle no news. And so recognizing that, and if there's something you can't say yet, I like to think about it in terms of this phrase, be as honest as you can be as soon as you can be. So if there's rumblings of, let's say it's a round of layoffs happening and you're a manager and everybody's talking about everybody knows it's going to happen, but nobody knows what department, how many people are going to be cut, giving a weekly update of here's what I know, here's what I can share now, and I will share more with you when I know more and when I can. And helping people know that as much as possible because if you don't say you don't know or you can't say whatever it is, people are going to be wondering. They're going to be wondering if they're the ones going to be cut or if you have their best interest at heart or if you're trying to navigate through it because that's a season of change for people and if we don't help them through that, I don't know. I don't think that's really helpful to them.
I
What's
think
coming
that's
up?
so powerful. Sorry, I think it's just I just want to reiterate what you just said is that they don't like bad news, but they really hate no news at all. It's
Mm-hmm.
that when there's that no news at all, there's that fear of the unknown, and all that's left is their brain to create their own story about what's happening, and it's going to be not great. And so yeah, it's going to be bad feelings if you give bad news, and it's still you're at least able to manage it and still preserve a relationship. So I just wanted to really highlight that for our audience. Like that's a really big thing to think about as a leader is giving bad news is better than giving no news at all about something.
That's a great point. I have another question around the difference between being honest and maybe being blunt. Where is the line where the manager can say, "Well, I'm being honest," and the employee, let's say, they can say they are being aggressive, they are being offensive with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm going to come back to lack of openness on that one. But even more importantly, I think is this kind of tension or way of speaking that we have to figure out. And that is what you're talking about, Lucy, is brutal honesty.
Mm.
And I like to think of brutal honesty in terms of if you're coming at somebody with a dagger or with a knife, whatever it is, imagine that as your brutal honesty. Think, you say, I'm going to be brutally honest with you right now. That's what you're doing to somebody else. And what is their reaction going to be? They're going to step back. They're going to protect. They're not going to hear a word that you say. And so, if what you're saying, even if it's tough news or it's bad news, like we were talking about, deliver it in a way that is 100% honest, vitally important that we have that, and 100% loving. And if we're talking about the workplace, I know love can be, people feel all types of way about the word love in the workplace, but I think it belongs and I think it's important that we talk about it more and we bring it back because when you can be 100% honest and 100% loving, that is when you are setting somebody else up on the other side to be their best at being open. And that's what we need to do to get that across. Because otherwise, you're going to have that conversation 3, 4, 7, 10 times, and you're going to wonder, why are they not getting it? Why do they not get it? Well, they're not listening to you at all because you're coming at them with a dagger. And that's not going to help anybody grow if they're trying to just protect themselves. So do it in a way that's 100% loving and 100% honest. It can be hard to do, but it is possible. And I watch people and leaders do it every single day.
What would you say are some phrases that people could use to help them if they, let's say, are in the environment or they have the personality, they're just focused on getting things done. And they're very extremely, rather than on focus on, yes, the relationships, emotions, they're a little bit very rational. Let's get this done. I'm just going to give you honest feedback. This is what it is. And when you tell them, be more loving, they're like, I'm being honest.
Mm-hmm.
When they don't know what to imagine under that, what would you say they can do differently or things to say?
Well, I think considering that being honest is being loving is important there. And saying, I'm telling you this because I care about you, or I care about the outcome or what this is going to do for our business, and just making that clear. And then if it's feedback you're giving to somebody, I think it's wildly important to have some alternatives for them. So if it's, hey, saw you in this sales call and these three things weren't great, here's how I would change them. Have some action steps, help them step forward too, and not just, hey, you sucked in that call. I don't know, do something about that. That's not helpful. That's not helping somebody progress in a way. And especially if you're a manager, that's kind of your job is to help people grow and to do that. So have some action steps for them and just pausing to say, I'm giving this feedback to you because I care about you, or I care about your growth, or I want you to grow. Something like that. Just that little phrase, that's way more than what we're doing sometimes with people, and helping them understand that, because otherwise it can feel like we was talking about that attack on them. And that's not helpful. And if somebody has been in an experience of getting feedback that way or multiple times, they've got some scar tissue around those kind of conversations. So help them unbury that, to come out of that, to get rid of that scar tissue, if you will. And say, I'm giving you this feedback because I care about your growth, or I care about you, or I care about whatever it is. Say it that way. And then have it. And then once you give it, be 100% open to what they have to say. Even if they are defensive, even if they've got a million questions, whatever it is, hear what they're saying and help them grow.
I love that you have your brand on your mug. Very
Oh, this is
cool.
so cool.
Um, I'm thinking about, when you said that you started that using agreements with your mom, you went back and started using that for anybody in their personal life or professional life, right? Like let's say they've had a culture or a relationship where they haven't done that kind of thing. And now they see the importance of like, yeah, you're right, Grace, this is perfect. I love this. How can they start bringing it up like, hey, I want to start doing this? Or maybe it's as simple as just saying, hey, I want to start doing this because I want us to communicate better. um Maybe that's as simple as that, but is there anything specifically in terms of how you help them frame that and kind of introduce that?
I think it's as simple as that. So we try not to overcomplicate it for people, but just in the framing of just saying, this is, I want more out of this relationship, or I want to take it deeper, or whatever it is that you want out of that. So don't don't go use the agreement with anybody on the street if you're not going to engage in it. Because the other part of the agreement is that if you're asking this of somebody, you have to model it really well. So I'm cognizant
Mm,
of that every time I ask somebody in a conversation that I'm having, whether it's a podcast like this or it's networking or I'm with a client, I have to model it really well. And I have to help them know, what does it look like to be honest? What does it look like to be open, to be fully present with them? I don't even bring my phone into meetings with me, or it stays in my bag. They don't ever see it. I try to not look at my watch, and things like that, and model it really well for people and have that understanding. And knowing that in the long-standing relationships, so that could be your family, that could be your friends that you've had for a really long time, whatever that is, this work will be a little bit harder because in your work life, those are people you've known for 2 years, 5 years, maybe, but not your entire lifetime. And so what we're looking at there at the relationship is we're looking at rebuilding the foundation. And you don't want to take a
mm,
bulldozer to the foundation. You want to chip away at it over time to rebuild it and to recognize that. Because if you go in swinging that bulldozer, that wrecking ball, well, that's not going to work out so well. So recognizing that it's built over time, but you have to build it together. It has to be done
mm.
together in this togetherness because we've gotten so divisive and we're not working together as well.
Do you
I'm
think the increase of hybrid working and Zoom working and the proliferation of just social media and like the anonymity has kind of made it worse or amplified those effects?
Yes, and that I think a lot of it maybe has to do with social media
Hmm.
because we can drop in and drop out there. When you sign up and hit the user agreement for whatever platform it is, they don't have the agreement in there as we're talking about it. They don't have that you're going to engage thoughtfully in dialogue with people. You can zoom in there, you can drop a controversial opinion and leave. You don't have to have that difficult conversation with somebody and to understand where they're at. And
Hmm.
so then we start to see people as their little icon picture or their username instead of as a human being on the other side of things. Drop in, leave a scathing comment we would never say to somebody's face. And then we start to view all human beings that way. And so I think you can have open and honest teams and open and honest relationships over Zoom, over phone calls, absolutely. But over social media, it's harder. And then the screen, it adds an element to it because as I'm looking at you, Chris, we're doing this on Zoom. And so there's a whole room outside of me. So that means I have to be even more focused to stay in this conversation, to give you my entire complete presence. And I think that's harder to do for people, but not impossible. I think it can be done, but
Hmm.
there is that human connection part that is missing out of it. And so that's where I struggle with it. And I understand the flexibility and how we can diversify teams. I mean, look at this would never happen, this conversation we're having, if we didn't have Zoom and that kind of technology. But it's hurting our ability to connect as human beings, to be in person with each other too. And so we got to
Hmm.
recognize that. And how do we combat that and overcome that?
That's such a gem of what you said about the our patterns of dropping in and out of interactions because you can't. That's not normal in terms of just you and me talking or us talking, right? Like in real life, we're talking, we're just in the room unless we physically leave the room. Um, and that's a huge thing.
I
So
didn't even
thanks for
think
that
about it in
gem.
those ways, but yeah, the physicality of it. I wouldn't just hop into a quick conference room and shout something at you and then leave. That's not how communication or conversations usually work, but you're right. That's what's happening
Right.
online.
On the street, maybe we'll just yell at
Hmm.
each other on the street randomly.
Yes.
And when we talk about yelling,
Hmm.
I wonder what are some of your strategies? Let's say people yell when they get upset, when they get triggered. When you yourself get triggered, what are some of your strategies that help you calm down, take a moment, rather than react immediately and snap back at them, let's say, in that difficult conversation?
Oh, that's so hard. But I think the pause is really important. And so conversations don't get to that point if you're really again, open to somebody, focused on what they're saying, because if you're not, as human beings, we can't multitask well. And so, Lucie, if you're talking and you say something and then I'm trying to pre-populate my response, well, now I'm trying to multitask, which means I'm really not listening to you at all. And I'm kind of amping myself up with my response. But if I'm actually present with you and listening, there's going to be that natural pause where my brain's kind of processing. Might be 2 seconds, but that pauses me thinking and giving a little bit of space so we're not getting to that overreactive point. And then knowing that if it does happen, because we're human beings and we can fly off the handle, understanding why that happens for you. Because if it's happening all the time, what I'd say is that there's there's a point in your life where you feel like you're not being heard. And so then you have to fly off the handle to be heard. And so why is that happening? Do you not have people in your life who are really listening to you? Do you feel like you're not being heard? What's happening there? Because it's kind of like I think about it as like a pressure cooker or a bottle popping off. All that pressure is building and building and building. And that's when you see people start yelling or freaking out because they feel like they're not being heard. And what that's telling me is that there's probably somewhere in their life a lack of openness from the people around them, from their teams, whatever that looks like. And so starting to investigate that so you don't ever get to that point, or you get to that point very, very rarely. And that's one area. And then the other way I think about it is, are you in line? Are you truly in line with yourself? Do you know what it is that you really want? Because if you don't know what you really want, you're going to get frustrated a lot faster. You feel like you're not going to make progress towards it because you're not clear on what it is. And so that's the other side of it too.
Sounds like
Grace,
really
you could have
being
been a. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
today we're just
This is the Grace. To your point, this is the hard part about doing Zoom interviews in a group.
Mm-hmm.
It's because in real life, obviously, we would just like look at each other and see like body language, like one of us is going to talk.
Yep.
But you can't do that over Zoom. Everything just kind of looks the same as we're looking at each
slightly
other.
different. Yeah. Now I forgot what I wanted to say. Go ahead.
Good, good. I wanted you to forget. Just kidding.
I know that was your strategy.
That was my strategy. I was just gonna say, Grace, you could have been a therapist.
Mm. Well, that is a really high honor. Thank you, Chris. I have been in therapy for 3 years, and on my own, my husband and I went through premarital counseling with a therapist. I've recently engaged with a new form of therapy around the IFS model, internal family
Mm,
systems. And
yep,
so
yep.
um, I think that's really important because my job is to lead people and to help people walk through this. And so if I'm not centered on myself, like we were just talking about, it's going to be a lot harder for me to lead teams, to lead companies through this. And I love therapy, huge proponent of it. I think it's fantastic.
So I'm a therapist as well, and um, what you said before about multitasking and like thinking of a response when somebody's talking. I remember when we were going through training, education in grad school, and like that's usually the question most therapists have in training is, what do I say when they say this? What do I say when this person says this? Like everybody's always concerned about what they're going to say next. And for me, my journey, I found that over time, the more I shifted to just let me just listen as deeply as I can to what the other person's thinking and feeling, the less I had to worry about what to say next because it just came naturally what I had to say next. As long as I have a framework of what's supposed to happen. But as long as I have that framework, as long as I'm listening deeply to what you're feeling, what you're expressing, the next thing that comes out will be pretty natural. It'll come out as long as I'm really listening to you and holding space for that. So I think that's why I think like the idea of therapy really falls into what you're saying because it's the same idea. How do we hold space for somebody and listen and not be distracted by our own thoughts of whatever we're going to do next, groceries or errands or whatever we're going to think we're going to say next.
Yeah. And I love that. And I think it's interesting that people want to know what to say next because they want that clear next step or direction, which is it's natural what we want as human beings, kind of want to know what to say next. But if we can get comfortable with not having a pre-populated response, we have a better conversation. We have better collaboration for that. And so I love therapy and I've, like I said, engaged in it for years. And I think about that in terms of teams. And so when you're in a team, it should not feel like a therapy session because we're working together to collaborate. So it's a big, clear difference there. But we kind of over index and go the opposite way where I just need to be heard. I need to get my
Hmm.
point across. And so we got to bring it towards the middle. And can I really hear what Chris is saying and his idea? And maybe it overlaps with mine. Maybe it's completely different. And we find something in the middle there. And then Lucie chimes in and Lucie adds some really great insight to it because she's got a position in the company or within the friendship, whatever it is that we're talking about, that gives us a different perspective. And now we're creating something even better together because that's when we're really winning, is when we're collaborating. You can go so much further as a team together than you can by yourself.
Hmm.
I think that's really important. But we got to be able to actually hear what somebody is saying and create that space.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Grace, let's imagine that somebody's listening right now and they skipped the entire episode and they only wanted to listen to the last 10 minutes of this episode for whatever reason in their life. What are 1 to 2 takeaways that they could take away from this conversation?
Okay, well, first go back and listen to the whole thing. What are you doing? Come on. But I understand that. But the two things, one or two things that I would say is, are you explicit about how you want your relationships to be and your communication? Are you wildly clear with people that you want an open and honest conversation, that you want open and honest communication, that you want an open and honest relationship? Do they know that? Do they know what that means? Do they know what that looks like? Are you collaborating and creating it together? Because if you have not expressly stated that, they're going to make something else up in their mind and it's not going to be the exact version of what you're
Mm.
hoping for. So getting wildly clear on that. And then I think the other part that we touched on that was really interesting to me is when we're talking about manager conversations and if you get a sense that your people aren't being honest with you, understand that that is something that's coming from you. And they know that they either know or they assume that you are not going to be open to their ideas, that you are not going to listen to what they really have to say. So why would they be honest with you? And let's be fair to them. Why would they be honest with you? And so you got to look back at yourself. Are you really being honest with them? And are you really being open to them? Consider that for yourself. Start there.
Grace,
Yeah.
where can people find you? Where can people follow you? Where can they get your book that's coming out?
Ah, well, thank you so much for having me. This was such a fun conversation. And our book is called No Honesty. Again, KNOW. You can get that, on all the big places where books are sold. On our website, it'll be nohonesty.com/book. So that's KNOW honesty.com/book. It's where you can get that. We dive even further into this. We get really deep into the 6 practices that I shared. We share stories that we've been through. We share stories of leaders who have gone through these experiences in our personal lives. We get into it and we share not only the stories, but also the education, some theory around it to help you really build up these skills and to change how the world communicates. That's our big goal. And we do that person by person. So when you read the book, then go have a conversation with somebody about it. Go implement this into your life. Have this be a way of communicating for you. So that's really important. And then if you want to continue the conversation with me, please reach out on LinkedIn. I love to talk about this all day long. We could go for another 3 hours into this if it were
That's for sure.
up to me. But if there's something I said that you're like, oh, I don't agree with that, or I love that, I want to hear more about that, reach out to me. Let's have a conversation. Let's keep it going.
Yeah. And we'll put links to all that in the show
Awesome.
notes. Do you have an audiobook version?
We will. Yes, there'll be an audiobook
Yay.
version. It's myself and Ken, my business partner, read it 50-50. So yeah, if you love the sound of my voice, great. You'll get to hear it 50% of the time. If you don't, great. You'll only hear it 50% of the time.
So win either way.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
How was it reading your own book out loud?
It was, I don't say this to be egotistical, but it was really enlightening because This book has been a multiple years project for us because we wanted to get it right for people and we wanted to share the
Hmm.
best stories possible. And so it took a lot of work and energy and effort, but it was living as a document on a computer for a lot of those years. And so then we got to the point where we were editing it and then printing it out and reading it out loud. And it was just this kind of amazing light bulb in my mind. Wow, we actually wrote all of this. We are
Mm.
subject matter experts in this. Ken and I co-wrote it together. We had those conversations. We deliberated over this. We wanted to make this the best possible. And so reading it out loud was such a gift and such a joy. And it was really actually doing the audiobook recording was fun because you're in this sound booth. And so I'm picturing myself talking to clients and I use my hands when I'm speaking a lot. And so I'm trying to do that cognizantly of not bumping the mic and picturing people's minds in my
Mm.
head as I'm
Hmm.
looking at
Nice.
a gray soundboard. But it was really fun and I hope that that enthusiasm comes through for people when they're listening to it too, because like I said, I love talking about this. This is my life's work, and I think that'll come through in the audiobook too.
Awesome. I'm excited to check it out. Oh, so
Me
everybody
too.
knows
I
we're
listen
recording
to
this
it.
before it comes out. So
Yes,
I
we're
have to
recording
wait like
before, but
everybody
it's
else.
We need to
accessible to
wait
you
now.
now.
It's available when you're listening to this.
Yes.
You can go get it right this minute.
There we go.
Um, Lucie, any final thoughts from you?
I really love the conversation. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Um, and a term came up for me, a caring honesty rather than blunt honesty. Just
Hmm.
as another takeaway for those that are feeling they're already honest. Are you being lovingly honest?
Hmm.
Mm, lovingly honest. I
Chris.
like that.
Hmm.
Yeah, I like that. I like the balancing the love with that honesty, and or the honesty is loving. And because whenever we talk about values, or in my previous companies we talked about values that are important to us, I always use love as one of the values. And not romantic love, but more so like, do I care about the people around me? Do I want the best for them, and do I want them to do well? um and so it resonated with me, at least, for sure. Grace, this was a awesome time. We're communication nerds, so we love talking about this stuff. And so it was a real pleasure having you join us today. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much for having me.
As Lucie and I are such communication nerds, that's why we have this podcast around difficult conversations. We do care so much and think so much about communication, especially in high stakes situations. And so I really appreciate Grace coming on and sharing about how do we be open and honest in these kind of things. So if you are interested, if you have any thoughts, please give us a like, give us a comment, subscribe. Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.